welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you're here. It's been a minute since I made my last video, I know, and my kitty co-host here, Annabelle's in the background, she's chiming in. And I'm so glad that you are joining me again for our discussion on Brené Brown's new book, Atlas of the Heart. We've been going through the chapters and discovering what the research shows about when certain things happen, what feelings and thoughts and actions and reactions are elicited, if that's the right word, yes, from those things happening. So chapter number 5 is the places we go when things aren't what they seem. So last time in the last chapter 4, we talked about when things, some of the things we talked about were when they were unexpected, surprising. This is a little bit different. There's a picture of a guy with a mirror in front of his face instead of his face. So what do you think of when you think of when things aren't what they seem? Like with that example, it's sort of like, well, you could think about perspective too, because if the two people were looking at that guy, they're going to see their own reflection versus something always being definable. So I think after reading this chapter, I think it's more like, it's like black and white thinking, because there's a few words that have some contradiction and things. So the things that they studied in this chapter are amusement, bittersweetness, nostalgia, cognitive dissonance, paradox, irony, and sarcasm. And in the first topic of amusement, I think that seems like an easy one to start with, right? When you think of amusement, you might think it's something funny, it's something fun, it's tantalizing to the senses maybe, and you might think like, oh, you're happy when you're amused. But she makes a distinction that there is a difference between being happy and being amused. There are two themes that clearly distinguish amusement from other positive emotions: life, contentment, gratitude, interest, joy, love, or pride. 1, an awareness of incongruity. There's something unexpected about what causes us to be amused. We weren't expecting that punchline or that behavior or the timing. So that could be something that wasn't what it seems. Maybe the surprise or the unexpected part in the last chapter that we talked about might cause an amused reaction as well. When we feel amusement, we feel playful with those around us. And the definition of amusement that aligns with her research is it's pleasurable, relaxed, and it's excitation. It differs from happiness, this is what I meant to say first, in its general sense of pleasure, whereas amusement appeals specifically to one's sense of humor. So people might, oh, we have a kitty that's, you can't see her, but she's jumped up back here on the hutch. She wants to be in the limelight. Again, perspective of things, like the same two people might go to a comedy show and be completely amused at a very different level, right? Depending on their sense of humor, or depending on what they might find as an appropriate topic to even make humor about. Jumping off into the next one, bittersweet. I could relate to some of the ones in this chapter a lot, because as you get older in your life, you definitely have more bittersweet moments, especially as people are aging or even as they've passed on, because going through that process. And I think about C.S. Lewis. There was a movie that Anthony Hopkins starred in called Shadowlands, and it was an autobiographical story of C.S. Lewis, the author that wrote the Narnia books. And in that movie, he tells his wife at the time, he says, you know what my kind of happy is? And she says, well, what is your kind of happy? And he says, it's not wanting to be anywhere else at the same, that I am right now. And in the movie, she's gonna die, and they both know it. And so they're having this lovely time, which is a very happy time. But she realistically says to him, it's going to change and we have to talk about it. And what they came to, which I thought was really beautiful, and I thought about this a lot with the bittersweet, is that you can be happy, but like this bittersweet is, again, it's a contradiction. So a lot of these things have contradictions. In a situation like that, where you might be with someone that's going to die, you might have these happy moments and there's an underlying feeling of the sadness that's coming. But then also, in that sadness that happens later, there's still that happiness that you had back when. I don't know how to explain it. This is kind of a hard one, or a hard chapter to really encapsulate, because there are a lot of contradictions, and I would think that everybody would experience these things a little bit differently. Let's see what her research says about bittersweet. It is a mix of feeling of happiness and sadness at the same time. So again, in that example that I just gave from the movie, they said the sadness is a part of the happiness now, and then later the happiness is part of the sadness now. So it's bittersweet. It's maybe knowing that your moment that you're in right now may not last forever. Like maybe it's that last year before your kid goes off to college, and so every time you do something, you're thinking, this is going to be the last time that we all do this before she goes away to college, you know? So, oh yeah, she gives some examples, like watching your children grow up, leaving a job, a divorce, ending of a relationship, graduating. Again, there would be happiness, but then there might be sadness in that because you're leaving your friends or that part of your life is over. Letting go of friendships that aren't working, moving, death of a loved one, teachers watching students graduate, retiring, coming home from vacation. Oh yeah, because that would be like you feel so good after the vacation, but you just don't want it to be over. I tend to be pretty emotional, or I just get touched emotionally easily. And I remember recently at an event, I was watching a slideshow of a child growing up, you know, who's now in college, but at the time he was getting ready to graduate. And so I was very touched by just watching the slideshow of all the sweet times that I remember when he was little. And somebody at the table said, like, why are you sad, you know? And I guess that person was interpreting it as me being sad, but really, if you think about it, it was more of a bittersweet moment because I was really enjoying the event and very happy for my nephew, who I'm talking about. And I wasn't sad. I was just touched by like thinking of his life and all the cute little moments of him being like 5 years old and being a Boy Scout and things like that. So it wasn't a sadness. So that person that asked me that wasn't really understanding, and I guess at the time I didn't know how to how to react. And in that case, I think I got a little bit uncomfortable because I felt like this is how I am and my emotions just come out. And some people are not totally in touch with their emotions, I suppose. So maybe my emotions made that person feel uncomfortable and they just interpreted it as sadness. So what goes hand in hand with that bittersweet thing, it could also be that I was experiencing nostalgia, right? One thing I think is interesting that I never knew about nostalgia is Brené tells us a story about the meaning of the origin of the word. It was actually a physical condition that a doctor came up to when he considered it to be a phenomenon, a medical term. And it was a pattern of his patients who were living far from home, those who were obsessed with returning to their estranged locations became physically and sometimes fatally sick. And that can happen, right? You can definitely have physical symptoms from experiences and emotions and things like that. And so, you know how we say we're homesick? Yeah, it's probably the origin of that too. So the disease reported symptoms included loss of appetite, fainting, heightened suicidal risk, and according to a Swiss doctor, hallucinations of people and places that you miss. So maybe you're just getting lost in your thoughts about how it was in the past. Now, she does talk about, and you know she does this in her book, sometimes she'll talk about like the positive and the negative parts of certain things. And in some respects, nostalgia is not considered to be a good thing because coupled with rumination, which we'll talk about next, it's like you're stuck in the past, or you're stuck in another situation that is not your present. So there's going to be, and we'll talk about cognitive dissonance as well, but there's going to be a divide between being happy in the moment and then like losing yourself in the past. She gets into some politics here, which I won't go into too much of, but does talk about, you know, how people say like they're nostalgic for the good old days. But there's things about that, you know, sometimes you can't go back, because if you looked at that, I'll just say, so this person's saying like, oh, I wish I could go back to the good old days. And what's really not spoken is the person is thinking like when people knew their places. And what's not spoken is when there was no accountability for the way that my behavior affected other people. And when we ignored other people's pain, if it caused us discomfort. So like think about women, you know, now their roles are much more out there in the mainstream. And so maybe in this good old days time, it might be back to like, you know, the 40s and 50s when the women are bound to the home. And if it's a man saying that, then maybe they want that. But, you know, it's not like you could ever go back after all the things that have happened. So nostalgia, it's good and it's helpful, but it can also be bad and dangerous or detrimental. You know, if you're saying that you want something because you're idealizing these other circumstances, which you're probably remembering in a different way than they actually were. Like when I think about, sometimes I think, and I, you know, with my technology stuff that I do, sometimes I just say like, oh, I'm living in the 80s, you know. But if I really think about going back to the 80s, I wouldn't go back. But there are things that like make me think that I have nostalgia about the 80s. But I'm sure that if there was a time travel, you know, like if time travel were to be possible, that me going to the 80s would not be anything like this nostalgic thoughts that I have in my head. Think about all the realities that would come to you, you know, like people smoking in the restaurants, and you know, just so many different things. It would be harder to communicate with people. Yeah, it just, to me, I idealize it more as a simpler time in my life though. But of course, like whenever you're growing up, my dad is the same way about his growing up. He idealizes that time in his life as well. Although we were just talking recently, he visited and he was saying, you know, how happy he was back then, but he said he didn't really think about consequences back then. And when he thinks about himself now as that teenager, that he knows that he would be different, you know, from all of his life experience, I think, obviously. So what is cognitive dissonance? So I've heard this a lot because it's something that I've obviously become a master of, because it is sometimes brought up in therapy. Because if you have a belief that is, well, I'm going to have to read it, but if you have a belief of something or an ideal, and then you're doing the opposite of it, then there's going to be a dissonance, right? So, for instance, is this the one where she says, yes. So say you have this belief that smoking is bad and it might kill you. It's funny, I just mentioned the smoking. But then you enjoy the smoking and you still smoke. That is cognitive dissonance. And the only way that you can make it not dissonant is if you can somehow change your behavior or change your belief, because those two things are contradicting, right? So you either would have to come around to saying, smoking won't kill me, it's good for me. I mean, maybe believing the opposite of research, although there are plenty of people that lived long lives that did smoke. Or you'd have to say, okay, I believe these things, so I'm going to quit smoking. But what about the fact that, and she goes into some about this as well, what about the fact that we often justify our decisions, even if they are cognitively dissonant? So maybe we know something is not really great on a moral level, but we justify it by coming up with the reasons why we're doing it. Or, oh, it's not that big of a deal, or nobody's gonna get hurt, or this money I'm taking is from a big company and they're not gonna know. And I mean, I'm trying to think of certain things where you might make a moral decision that at your core level, if you really wrote down all the things that you wanted to be about yourself, you would know was really not in line with who you want to be. But then you're still doing it. So if you let cognitive dissonance go on for too long, it's only going to eat away at your soul, right? I mean, how can you live with yourself if you're not living the way that you really know is right, or that you believe or want to be? And I don't even mean to make it about a right or a wrong thing. It can be about any belief that you have. And so, if you put it could be about anything, like I said. So it could be like the same thing with the smoking, like, oh, I can't eat cake because it's going to make me fat. And so then you're eating cake. And I mean, of course, like in that situation, what you think is going to happen is going to probably happen, so you will get fat. Anyway, I could talk about this one for a long time because it is, I was going to say a paradox, but she does talk next about what a paradox is. It's different from a paradox. So in a cognitively dissonant situation, you cannot have two things that are different happening at the same time without having discomfort. So think about that smoking situation. You can keep doing it, but every time you smoke, you're going to have that conflicting feeling, or you're going to kind of like be shameful about it, or know that in your heart you wish you weren't doing it. But with a paradox is actually when you can have two opposing views, or you're aware of two truths that are actually, it doesn't seem like they would be possible, but they both exist. And you can go on and it doesn't affect you in a negative way. Let's see what she says. A paradox is the appearance of contradiction between two related components. Although light and darkness seem to be opposites, you can't have one without the other. So that's the adjoining thing about a paradox. So it's like you need to have both things, and you can exist with both things. And it's like, I don't know, you've just put aside the fact that you're even going to worry about it. You're just aware that there's these two things. I don't know why I always think of, there's a Chicago song where he's like, it's a paradox full of contradiction. I mean, but it's not like, or this also made me think about, because when we get into irony, I think of that Alanis Morissette song about ironic. Anyway, going off on my little tangents here. So hopefully that makes sense between the difference of cognitive dissonance and paradox. Paradox, again, when she measures things, paradox is maybe the more positive one. The cognitive dissonance is going to cause a lot of long-term suffering probably in life. You know what, I must have skipped over, and it's okay, I can just touch upon it really quickly. She did talk about rumination, and when we were talking about nostalgia and bittersweet, rumination is when, and it could be related to cognitive dissonance as well, but when you cannot stop thinking about something, it's different than, I almost said regret, but regret probably comes out of rumination. But if you're ruminating about something, then you're stewing about it, and it's usually something that you can't get over. Like, why did I do that? Or how could I hurt that person? Or how can I live with myself because I did this to my spouse? Or I stole this money, or I had that hit and run accident, or like something horrible that you just are, and it actually doesn't even have to be that catastrophic. It could be something like you're ruminating over the fact that, you know, you have like dimples in your arms, or you have cellulite, or you don't like the way your teeth are crooked now or something. I'm bringing in things about my own life. So if you ruminate on those things, it's going to be bad. And she did say a bunch of stuff about depression in this chapter, about if you combine a bunch of these things, like if you are just constantly stuck in that nostalgic mode and you ruminate on how it's like, oh, you know, I'll never have my kids again when they were young, and that was like the happiest time in my life, and I'll never be that happy again. Or I had this marriage and it was happy, and now I don't have it anymore because he died, and all I can do is just be lost in my thoughts of that relationship, and I'll never like live in the present. I mean, a lot of this is about what makes us unhappy in the moment. So I don't think of nostalgic and bittersweet as a negative thing, because I like to revisit the past. However, I can see what she's saying if you're ruminating on things, and if rumination is holding you back from moving forward or being in the present, then that's what becomes a problem. And she closes this chapter with irony and sarcasm, which she sort of couples together, which I understand, because sarcasm is a type of irony. So irony is, they're a form of communication in which the literal meaning of the word is different, often opposite, from the intended message. In both irony and sarcasm, there may be an element of criticism and humor. However, sarcasm is a particular type of irony in which the underlying message is normally meant to ridicule, tease, or criticize. Yeah, when you think about those two words, I definitely think of sarcasm as being more of a deeper level of passive-aggressive behavior. Irony, I almost said ironic, but irony could be something simple that you just think like, wow, that's ironic. But if somebody's being sarcastic, then it's not usually a lovely experience, right? So what do you think? Are there other things that come to your mind when you think of when things aren't what they seem? Again, with the guy with the mirror, and you think about the cognitive dissonance, or if you think about like a paradox. Actually, that situation that I mentioned at the beginning with him with the mirror, there would be two people looking at the same person, but they're seeing themselves. And so it is true that what they see is what they see, but they're existing at the same time due to perspective, I suppose. So I guess that title was actually a good name for the chapter. I don't really know how amusement seems like it just sort of like was thrown in there. Although, yeah, if you're going to become amused by something, it is usually like there's a punchline from a comedian who just has the perfect, you know, timing or the perfect comment on something. So, okay. I guess I can understand that. Or even like if you're at an amusement park and all of a sudden you're just like drop out of, you know, the thing drops down and your stomach is still up high, like 10 stories higher. Some people find amusement out of that. I don't. So let me know what you think about this one. There was a lot to this, and I don't feel like I did it justice entirely. So I hope you go back and read it again. It's chapter number 5. And we'll continue on with our Brené Brown experiment throughout this whole year. And also, I have to tell you, anybody who follows my channel because of my planner videos, I do have an exciting video coming up where I have designed my own planner. This is only for me. It's not like something I'm going to sell or anything. But definitely like and subscribe to get notifications about that one coming up. I don't know if it'll be my very next video, but it will be coming up soon. Hope you are all doing well, and I will talk to you on the next video. Annabelle was just saying bye there, by the way, too. Love to you all. Bye-bye.